Hi everyone, thanks for coming back for part 3. I'm sorry for making a short story long, but I just wanted to explain how I came up with this revelation concerning the wall, and these were all things that I wanted to explain and share anyway concerning Isaiah 34. And I eventually want to get back to Ezekiel 47 and 46 because there's very important information in these two chapters. I believe it all has to do with DNA, especially in chapter 46 and the restoration of the temple, as well as the consummation of the covenant. So there's a lot more that I want to talk about. But I also want to explain how I came up with this revelation concerning the wall, because it helped me to understand more clearly this verse in Jeremiah 31:22, where it says, "How long will you wander, unfaithful daughter of Israel? The Lord will create a new thing in the earth. The virgin will enclose a man." And I understood this to have to do with the consummation of the covenant and with DNA based on the numbers here in part. I've talked about before how the new covenant is talked about in Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 33. So I knew this was talking about the consummation of the covenant. And I've talked about before how the number 22 has to do with DNA. And I've talked about before how the earth is represented as female. If you put in the terms new thing, you see you come up with these matches over here, and you see that the earth over here is referred to in the feminine. It says, "But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth and swallow them up with all that appertain unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, then you shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord." And this is what's going to happen to Pharaoh's army, the Antichrist army, in the end. And then in Ecclesiastes, it says that there's no new thing under the sun. Everything that has been is what will be, so there's nothing really new. And then in Isaiah 43 it says, "Behold, I will do a new thing, and now it shall spring forth. Shall ye not know it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert," which is what's going to happen when the Mount of Olives splits. And then in Jeremiah 31:22 it says, "How long wilt thou go about, O thou backsliding daughter? For the Lord hath created a new thing in the earth. A woman shall encompass a man." And I've talked about how in the Greek it doesn't actually say the word woman. It just says basically, "How long will thou go about, a backsliding daughter," as it says here. For the Lord has created in salvation, it says over here, He has planted something new in salvation. It says it twice. And then it says that there will be surrounded people, or compassed people will be compassed. And so that's what's going to happen to Satan's army when they go down into the pit. But I believe this is also talking about the consummation of the covenant, particularly in the Hebrew where it uses the word woman. And the word man is in the singular. Okay, and so it kind of bothered me that although I understood this to be a representation of the consummation of the covenant, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how that's depicted by this imagery as well. I want to talk a little bit more about it, but although I understood it to be a representation of the consummation of the covenant, it kind of bothered me that there was no representation of the female clearly alluded to in this imagery. Of course, as I mentioned before, I believe the Dead Sea represents a bride, represents a female, as well as the earth. And so the water flows out to the Dead Sea and to the earth. But there wasn't a clear representation of the female counterpart in this, and because when you look at the imagery this way, you don't even think that much about the wall. And even when I saw this other image, I didn't really even think about the wall that much. It didn't really register what the wall represents until I was doing this study in Isaiah 34. And so I just wanted to verify that, first of all, this was not talking about Satan's kingdom, that there's a transition that takes place where it begins to talk about the kingdom of God. And especially in verse 16, I think it's more clear. It says, "Seek ye out the book of the Lord and read. No one of these shall fail, none shall want her mate, for my mouth hath commanded it, and his spirit it hath gathered them." And so I was looking at this in the Hebrew, and I noticed that if you look at the word none in the Hebrew, it's the word isha. So it says, "None shall want her mate." And so that didn't make a lot of sense. I was looking at the word isha, and I noticed that this word, it can mean female, but it can also mean each and every one, and not necessarily female, but I wanted to verify that. So I was looking at the references of where this word was used. Okay, this was some time ago, so it's kind of hard to remember how to retrace my steps, but I just remembered now. What I did is I clicked on over here on the word one to see how it's used in that context when it's just the word one, and you can see that it's talking about one flesh here, to make one wise. And I noticed at some point that it had the word tenions. Okay, it was actually here in Exodus 26:17. It says, "Two tenions shall there be in one board, set in order one against another, thus shalt thou make for all the boards of the tabernacle." Okay, so it reminded me of a table that I did, and it's in this video right here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up this video so you can see the table. That's the only way I could find the table. Okay, and if you haven't seen this video, I highly recommend it. I'll put the link in the description box. But what I had put in was wall, built, and bride. Okay, and as you can see, the word bride is coming up here in the lavender, and it's right where it says he built an outer wall to the city of David, and so bride is going right through that. Now, before I show you where this comes up, what I was reminded of, because it was in the video, but I'll just show it to you here in Nehemiah 7:1, where they're talking about building the wall. In Nehemiah, what I had noticed around that time is that the word wall is Strong's number 2346. And so this has to do with DNA. The wall has to do with DNA, but the other thing about the wall that I had pointed out while making that video and around that time is that the wall represents the bride. Because in Revelation 21, which is 3 times 7, it mentions the new heaven and the new earth, and it says, "And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband." And then when you get to verse 17, it starts talking about the measurements, or actually begins before that, but in verse 17 it says, "And he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man," that is, of the angel. And it's in multiples of 7 where it talks about the 144,000. It first comes up in Revelation 7, and then again in Revelation 14. And then here you have the number 144 mentioned again. It's talking about New Jerusalem, which it just told you that that's the bride. And the wall measures 144 cubits. And when you look at this in the different Bibles and the different translations, you see that it's also referred to as 216 feet. And it's also referred to as 72 yards. So these are all numbers that represent the bride. They represent the measurement of the wall of New Jerusalem. Okay, so it wasn't until I saw that it dawned on me that the wall, or I was reminded that the wall represents the bride. So this is how a woman can encompass a man as it says in Jeremiah 31:22. And I hadn't even thought about that at all when I first showed this image. This image over here in my last video, that hadn't occurred to me at all. I had no understanding of that until, like I said, this morning when I was doing a little bit of research on this word one, which, like I said, it can refer to, in general, just the word one and not necessarily in the female. But it's when I saw the reference of the two Tenyans that it reminded me of the table. It was actually one of the tables that was in this video. I actually had to watch this whole video again, and that's when I saw the table that I was looking for, but I was reminded of all this other stuff about the wall. And like I said, I highly recommend watching this video if you haven't seen it. It's actually one of my favorite videos, and it's interesting that it has 223 views currently and 17 likes, so those numbers even match. Okay, it talks about the two Tenyans just after this, so I'm just going to play a little bit of it. Okay, so that's where you had two Tenyans joined, where I had put in tabernacle, feast, last day, bride, and birth. And so you have the word bride over here a little bit further down in the blue. And then birth was in the green, but the words two Tenyans joined was coming up right where you had the word feast in the pink, and then the tabernacle, and then the word last, as in last day. And so that's when I understood the two Tenyans represented Christ and the bride, that it represents DNA, the restoration of the temple or the tabernacle. Okay, and so it was while watching this video that I was reminded about the wall as well, and that the numbers for wall, the Strong's numbers, are 2346, which has to do with DNA. And then I was reminded about this table, which I had completely forgotten about. Okay, so now I want to read this part of the table. It's in 2nd Book of Chronicles 33 verse 14. It says, "Now after this he built an outer wall to the city of David on the west side of Gihon," that's the Gihon spring that I talked about in my last video, "in the valley, even to the entrance of the fish gate, and he compassed Ophel," which I've talked about the meaning of Ophel, "about with it, and raised it up to a very great height, and he put valiant captains in all the fortified cities." Okay, and that's where you have the words wall, built, and bride. Okay, and so here's Ophel. This is the image that had come up when I had put in the word Shin, the letter Shin, in Jerusalem. And then here is the Gihon spring. That's actually how these images came up when I had put in the words Gihon spring. Okay, and so the water flowed from the threshold of the temple, and then it watered the Kidron Valley and the Dead Sea, and then you can see where the Gihon spring is in this image as well, and how it was originally, and how it merges with Hezekiah's tunnel, which is what I want to talk about next, but I'm running out of time, and so I'll have to continue in the next video. There's a lot more that I want to share about this. But the Siloam pool is actually where they went for healing in the New Testament, but like I said, I'll have to share more in the next video. Thanks for watching. and God bless you.